When initially looking at the UDL guidelines, it can seem overwhelming. Where do I start? First, let me help orient you by drawing your attention to a few key points. Highlighted at the top are the 3 UDL principles: to provide multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. When moving vertically through each principle, the next major components are the UDL guidelines, in which each UDL principle has 3 main guidelines. Let's start at the first UDL principle, to provide multiple means of student engagement, and to take a further look. This first principle has 3 guidelines. Guideline 7, to provide options for recruiting interest. Guideline 8, to provide options for sustaining effort and persistence. And Guideline 9, to provide options for self-regulation. Then, each guideline has multiple checkpoints. For example, Guideline 7 has 3 checkpoints, the first one being 7.1, optimize individual choice and autonomy. The principle is the overarching concept or idea of what one wishes to accomplish in terms of learning goals. The guidelines then provide specific suggestions of how you can achieve that specific principle. The checkpoints are then very specific strategies that can be used to enact that guideline. Let's now take a look at the second UDL principle, to provide options for representation. Guideline 1 of this principle is to offer options for perception. Guideline 2, to provide options for language and symbols. And Guideline 3, to provide options for comprehension. These guidelines help achieve the UDL principle of providing students multiple forms of representing the learning content. Again, each guideline has multiple checkpoints which provide specific strategies to achieve that certain guideline. One thing to note when looking at the guidelines and checkpoints is that the numbers seem to be out of order. The first UDL principle of engagement begins with guideline number 7, whereas the second UDL principle of representation begins with guideline number 1. This is because the Center for Applied Special Technologies, CAST, the developers of the UDL guidelines, originally had representation as the first UDL principle, followed by action and expression, and ending with engagement. However, over time, as they worked with students and educators, they realized that engagement needed to be the first principle. This is because the other UDL principles could not be achieved if the students were not initially engaged in the classroom and in their own learning. Now it is important to note that the most essential components of the UDL guidelines are displayed on the horizontal. According to the UDL guidelines, we want to create expert learners who are purposeful, motivated learners, resourceful, knowledgeable learners, and strategic, goal-directed learners. By moving vertically through each principle, you are developing students into the final goal of that principle. When looking at each principle and moving through the horizontal, you can see that these guidelines and checkpoints are the most basic of each principle. As you move through the next horizontal section, the guidelines and checkpoints become more challenging to achieve. For example, after recruiting students' interests, how do you keep the students engaged in their work and build upon the initial interest you achieved? Finally, in the final horizontal row, this is when you truly want to foster and develop a student's independence. For example, still looking at the first UDL principle of engagement, you can allow students opportunities for self-assessment and reflection, keeping them engaged by assessing their own progress and accomplishments. Once reaching that final section of each principle, students will have developed many new skills to enhance their learning and success as students. As you move from the earlier guidelines, which involve many external supports and interventions, you begin to develop the final goal for students, which is empowering the students to be independent learners without the external interventions. Although the intention is to move through the guidelines to achieve those final goals, the guidelines are also designed so that checkpoints can be applied in any order at any time. Students may be at different points in their learning paths, and due to this, one can determine which UDL principle, guideline, and checkpoint would be most suitable, no matter how far up or down it is on the UDL guidelines chart. Therefore, the answer to the original question, where do I start, is anywhere that makes sense for you and the students that you support.